For our Day 6 notes, we're going to be talking about the circumcenter. The circumcenter is the point of intersection where all three perpendicular bisectors of the triangle meet. So if you take a look at the picture that we have here, you can see that in the picture, for the triangle, there are three perpendicular bisectors that were drawn in. Here's one of them, here's the other, and here's the third. The picture shows that they're perpendicular bisectors because you can see that all of them are hitting the side of a triangle at the perpendicular. And then the bisector part comes into play when you actually look at the sides of the triangle, and you will see that they tell you that this is congruent to this, and then over here, and then over here. So we have three perpendicular bisectors drawn in. Just like with the incenter, that ends up being where the angle bisectors intersect at one point. In this particular case, this circumcenter is the one point where all three perpendicular bisectors meet. In addition, if you are to put the compass at the incenter and you were to open up to any of the three vertices of the triangle, this measurement is going to be exactly the same. So if you go around and draw this circle with your compass, each of those green measurements from the circumcenter to the edge of the circle become radii. So it allows you to draw the smallest circle possible that passes through all three of the triangle's vertices. It is possible that the circumcenter can sometimes land outside the triangle, so don't be surprised if that happens. Our job today is going to be to do two constructions, one of which is going to be to construct the circumcenter of the circle. And in this case, you have to do two of the three perpendicular bisectors of the sides of the triangle. And when you draw two of them, you're going to find that point of intersection, and that point of intersection will be where the circumcenter is. For the second construction, you are going to first construct the circumcircle just like you did in the previous question. I'm sorry, circumcenter like you did in the previous question. And then once you know where that point is, let's suppose it's here, you're going to go around and you're going to draw that in. So for this particular set of questions, question 1 and question 2, I'm going to direct your attention to see the WITS video. So it's a separate video in the links where you're going to go to watch a video on how to do those two things. For the other two questions on this paper, we're going to be using our graph to help us find the circumcenter of the triangle. We know that the circumcenter does involve the perpendicular bisectors, and we're going to do two of the three of them in this triangle. So first thing I'm going to do is plot the points for my triangle. So my triangle has one vertex at 0, -3, one vertex at 0, 5, and one vertex at 6, 3. And then I'm going to go in, draw my line to connect those. You should be using a ruler to do this. And here's my triangle CAT. When you have a graph, please do not forget to make sure you label the X and Y axis. And for our circumcenter, we basically could do three perpendicular bisectors. We're going to pick only two, and we're going to graphically go in and take a look at where those are. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the segment or side of the triangle that goes from A to C. If I look at that side of the triangle, I can visually see that along AC there is a midpoint. A and C are 8 apart, so if I count 4 from either direction, I will get the midpoint, so I'm going to call that M. And the midpoint, which we are calling point M, has coordinates 0, 1. If that is the midpoint, and it's the midpoint on a vertical line or a Vux line, the line that's perpendicular to AC must be a Hoy line or a horizontal line, And the horizontal line we know starts with y equals, and it has to pass through the point 0, 1. So I'm going to steal the y coordinate from that point. So my first perpendicular bisector is going to be the line y equals 1. I'm going to draw it just like this. I also have to find a perpendicular bisector to one of my other two sides. So what I'm going to do is you can pick either one, I'm going to pick AT as my other side that I look at. When I look at AT, I can visually see where the midpoint is. This time I'm going to call the midpoint N. You can call it whatever you want. And my midpoint in this case, when I look at my graph, is over 3 up 4. So it's the point 3, 4. My perpendicular bisector has to pass through that point, and it has to be perpendicular to AT. The slope of AT, if we count on the graph, down 1 over 3, down 1 over 3. The slope of the line AT is negative 1/3, which means that the line perpendicular to AT is the negative reciprocal of that, or 3 over 1, which is just 3. When I have these two pieces of information, the midpoint and the perpendicular line slope, I can go to the midpoint 3, 4 and count up 3 over 1, the slope that I have here, up 3 over 1, and I can go in the other direction, down 3, left 1, down 3, left 1. And when I do that, I'm going to have the perpendicular bisector able to be drawn in. And there's where that second perpendicular bisector is. If you wanted to, you could write the equation for it, although we don't really have to here because we are using our graph to do this. And when I do this, once I have those two drawn in, I can see that what I have right here is a point of intersection between my two perpendicular bisectors. That point is the circumcenter. So if I am looking for the coordinates of the circumcenter, I look for where my two perpendicular bisectors intersect, and in this case, it is the point 2, 1. That is what they were asking for me to find, was that circumcenter. And I go in graphically, find where the perpendicular bisectors are to two of the three sides of the triangle, and then I can go back, find those two's point of intersection, and that will be my circumcenter. On the next question, it's the same exact thing. My recommendation to you is to try this on your own and then maybe come back and take a look at what I've done when I've gone through and answered this question. So I'm going to pause the video now, and I'm going to plot the points and get my triangle, DOG, my second favorite triangle in the world, and then I'll come back and start working on this one. So I have my triangle DOG. I have to decide which of the two sides I want to do the perpendicular bisector of. And of course, it doesn't really matter. It's sort of up to you. You get to pick whichever ones you want. So I'm going to start by looking at the segment that goes from D to O. And when I look at the segment that goes from D to O, it's very easy for me to see what the midpoint is of that particular segment. It is the point 0, 3. So my midpoint is 0, 3. And I can see that the slope from D to O is up 1 over 1. So when I'm looking at the perpendicular bisector of DO, it should have a negative reciprocal slope, which is going to be negative 1 over 1. Once I know these two things, I can draw the line. I go to 0, 3. And I go with a slope down 1, right 1, down 1, right 1, down 1, right 1, etc. And then I can draw that line in. So my perpendicular bisector is going to go like this. And again, this is just a quick little drawing. We're using a graph to figure out this information. And then I have to pick another side to do the perpendicular bisector of. And what I'll look at this time, and you get to pick, I'm going to look at OG. And if I look at segment OG, I can visually pick out what the midpoint is. You could do midpoint formula if you wanted to. 1, 2. So my line isn't very straight. It's hard to draw it perfect on the smartboard, but that's my midpoint. If you want to name it, you could. I know in the last one we did name them, M and N, but I'll call this one N. And that midpoint has coordinates 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. And because my segment that goes from O to G is drawn on my paper, I can count the slope. And if you count the slope, it's down 1 over 1. Now my perpendicular bisector, the line that's perpendicular to OG and bisecting it or hitting it at its midpoint, will have a slope that is equal to the negative reciprocal of that. So it'll have a slope of positive 1 over 1. So from this point, I count up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, and then I can go in the other direction, down 1, back 1, down 1, back 1. So here is my second perpendicular bisector. From these two things, I start at the midpoint and I count with that slope. Now I can look for the point of intersection between those two. So when I'm looking at the green and the blue lines that were the perpendicular bisectors, the circumcenter turns out to be right here. There's something slightly unusual about this circumcenter because it lands exactly on the side of the triangle. That can happen. So the coordinates of this point are 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 1. It's hard for me to read it on this graph on the smartboard, but I'm pretty sure it's 4, negative 1. And that is the question that they asked me to find. Now, in this case, I'm going to add one more component to this question. If this question asked you to draw or construct the circumcircle, just as a little review or reminder, if I was to draw the circumcircle, what I would do to draw that would be to take my compass. I have to find my compass. Give me a second here. Measurement tool, compass. And from my compass, I'm going to take that compass and I'm going to put it at the center with its vertex, center of the circle, at that point of coordinate circumcenter 4, negative 1. So I'm going to move my compass over to there, put the point right on that 4, negative 1. I'm going to open my compass so that it stretches from there to the vertice of the triangle. And again, this is off a little bit because of it being on a graph on the smartboard, and from there I'm going to draw my circle. Theoretically speaking, my circle, I think that was in too far, my circle should really pass through point G. I think mine was off a little bit. So I'm going to go to point G. There we go. Now it's lined up exactly. Yours should look more like this, not the inside one, but more like that one. And that circle that we just drew on there is our circumcircle. Not the first circle I drew. I was off a little bit. I had to go back and reposition. So my pencil, when I did that, actually passed through point G. I was a little too far in on my first circle. And then you draw your circle around. Notice that that circle hits all 3 vertices of the triangle. So every time you draw that circumcircle in there, the circumcenter is where the compass point goes. You open to one of your vertices. I went to G. You could have gone to O or to D, and you draw your circle. And it should pass through every single point. Please keep in mind that that could have taken numerous steps in a construction. So it might have been the case that when you drew that circumcircle on there, if you were doing a full construction for this, it might have been off a little bit passing through points D and O if you started at G. We know that there's human error in there, so we're not going to stress too much about that.